morning, sir, or afternoon, as the case may be for you.
Right.
So, but before we, how you doing over there? You sound like your temperature has soared through the roofs of
Yeah,
some
it's
odd.
92 degrees Fahrenheit right now. Out, bloody, just muggy. Muggy as all get out. Sunny and hot.
Unusual.
It's hazy now. The clouds moving in. We might get a thunderstorm this afternoon.
That unusual?
Yeah, this is very much like late July, early August weather. In August last year we got, it was in the 90s during the day. A few days, it got close to 100 or maybe just 100. We're just 2 months too early for this. It's not. So
God,
like we went straight from winter into the heat of summer. So it's going to wreak havoc on the horticultural and agricultural production nearby.
yeah, we're getting a similar thing. Even today, yesterday it was 50 degrees and rainy and cold in the morning, and it was rainy and cold the day before that. It's been cold for a while now, and down in the 40s, which is highly unusual
Mm,
for area. But then I think
right.
it's supposed to be 89.
Oh wow. It
So
just really can't settle on something reasonable. It's got to be either too cold or too hot.
yeah, and you look at the radar, and there's this, for us anyway, there's this inland hurricane going on, like the two streams from the
Mm,
Gulf up and just making this thing going on right over it. It just keeps going east and west, shifting back and forth, and so we get hit by it, and then it clears up, and we get hit by it, and clears up. It's very, very strange. I mean, it makes me appreciate a day like today so much more when I wake up and there are no clouds in the sky, because, gosh, dismal.
yeah.
I was maybe we should wait and go on record about this bit, but I was thinking the other day about the experience of this weather change, and I know it happens periodically on the Earth, and how
Oh,
different,
let's talk about that.
the 14th century weather
Mm,
change occurred, that horrible cooling that went on in 1315, and how everybody
hmm
starved by 1317. There was no food, and just day after day of miserable weather, lasting all the way up into the 1400s, apparently. Yeah, that would have been just ghastly, just terrible. I mean, it's no wonder they get so sick of it, they decide to start the Hundred Years' War. Oh,
Finally fed up with it all.
yeah, right, exactly. I can't help but think. I mean, I'm very grateful for the modern era for being able to survive a thing like this, but I can't help but think that it puts a lot of stress on everybody, not just the farmers, but on everybody when you have this kind of
Yeah,
strange one. So,
yeah. And I think it. How do you say? I believe in the Jurassic Park principle that there's a certain equilibrium that's naturally that necessarily is achieved, whether harmoniously or brutally, forced equilibrium by just the sort of the macro system. And so I wonder how much of an advantage it actually is. You've got all the tools and amenities and technologies to survive the weather and the food shortage because you've got logistics and all of this. But you've also then, there's the flip side is that, of course, we've come to rely on those things, and nobody produces a thing for themselves, but we rely on things that are shipped from far away, at least in the United States, even more so than much of Europe does. If that goes down, you're in trouble. But the thing that occurs to me is, of course, you've got much more disastrous weapons now today due to that very same technology. So that if people are going to be under the same kind of psychological stress, regardless, you know, it's maybe more avoidable now, but when the severe, the medium kind of wave things are more avoidable nowadays, or mitigatable. When a severe change comes, you've got a much greater capacity for just deciding to pick 100 years war. Uh, you know, just let's decide to start the 100 years war is a lot less disastrous on a global scale when it's just at most crossbows and a few minor explosives.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. You have something there with the Jurassic principle, which I like that. Um, Jurassic Park is a wonderful movie and book by Michael Crichton,
Hmm
where the there are certain lines out of there that just stick with me ever since I saw the movie. It's supposed to be just a fun action. It has some seriously powerful lines. That Jeff Goldblum line about how you were so intent on finding out whether you could, you never stopped to consider whether you should.
Right.
And then your principle, of course, how nature finds a way. There's an equilibrium that occurs. I think do that definitely. Call it providential. I don't know whether what exactly the right term would be on that score, but Cameron, on one hand, I'm very enamored of the idea of living off the land and living simply and all that. And I really like that idea. Then on the other hand, I read history and I think, God damn, I don't want to be in that situation. And I don't know which one is really worse necessarily. The one which would be terrible physical privation, and yet maybe you have a strength of character because you were inured to that kind of struggle. And then our situation, we have no serious physical struggles, and yet we have these monsters that crop up because they're so devoid of meaning and tortured by the modern era. So it's the same. I mean, do you follow what's going on in the news and the States? I'm sure you get a different on what happens over here because the news systems over there are probably a different machine to some degree.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, especially in the extremely highly polarized environment that's evolving rapidly. Today, of course, the foreign, as to say, this side of the pond, the news is not necessarily so caught up and not immediately partisanized from within the United States system, right? So there's definitely an angle, but it's an angle of the different competing perspectives that exist in Europe, which don't line up with the American, the binary American system. They certainly have their extreme differences, but they're just not they don't fit into the same categories, right?
Mm-hmm. They probably more concerned with their big neighbor to the east, right?
Yeah, somewhat, and even there, it's very different. Each country has very, very different takes on it because of their own particular histories and concerns, and their concerns with their neighbors. Nobody here has forgotten, all the backdoor deals that have been, alliances and that kind of thing from, a little over 100 years ago, leading up to World War One, into the 19th century sort of house of cards that was built. And there's still a lot of those same principles legally that exist internationally. And so you see some of the same patterns, watching the international relations that are going on here in Europe right now feels like playing a game of diplomacy, if you've ever had the joy of setting that up. It's like watching the history in that way. But no, in the United States, we can see, everybody's, of course, just appalled. This is the usual reaction in Europe, is something happens in America, and we are just appalled that you can't get it together, That's the first reaction. It's not like, well, should there be gun control or not? Or gun control versus abortion, right? It's just like, that's not the first thing we go to because, we've got very different, concerns for our own, governance and all of that. It's just, my God, really, it doesn't matter. Why do you keep killing each other?
Yeah.
There's something much deeper than the tool used or the political ideology adhered to so much. It's just something much deeper under the surface going on if this happens with that kind of frequency.
Yeah, and I think that's actually astute because that's really that's the higher argument that we ought to be having here in the States. What is actually at the core of this craziness that leads not just to what happened down there in Texas, but the craziness that leads to sorts of other beastly things. The rioting that we had years ago, or the rise in crime, or whatever it is. What is up with that? And I think nobody here in America, this is an odd thing, I think nobody here in America really wants to address the fact that it has to do with human psyche, the soul itself. They want to address the fact that we have too many guns, or that we need better schools.
Well, yeah, because that's something that's safely externalizable. Right? Yeah. It's something out there, and so it's safe. I don't have to worry about or the deep existential crisis, which because that implicates me, right? You know, every one of us, you know, to have that conversation implicates. I mean, it's one to admit that personally, as a high-powered CEO or a lobbyist, politician, you know, military leader, um, I've got some really deep like I'm in a bad way. Like
Yeah.
things aren't well, that kind of thing, which is true for many. It doesn't matter what rank you have in society. And I've worked with people in those particular ranks, and it's the same thing as everybody else. To say that I'm personally in a bad way, and that as a society, we've got some very deep, dark skeletons we need to address and
Yeah.
change. Um, but that's what Eric Fromm writes a lot about, you know, coming from the post-war experience. You know, he's got the great works, Escape from Freedom, and you know, the sort of drive towards death and totalitarianism, because freedom, true freedom, is a lot harder to try and manage and actually deal with and live up to than its counterfeits. And sane society, the sane society is the essential premise. And Walker Percy summarized that one very well. He did a review of the book and corrected some of the mistakes that Fromm made. But Walker Percy's review of the sane society, which is a brief essay, I mean, it's a book review, called The Coming Crisis in Psychiatry. I highly recommend it, highly
Yeah.
recommend it. I mean, essentially, the premise is, you know, we talk about anxiety and depression, and, you know, this existential malaise, all these things as though there's psychiatric disorders. He says, but what if, there's a frightening proposition, what if they're just a very natural, healthy reaction to a very sick system,
Hmm.
you know?
In other
Um,
words, just an individual here or there. The problem is sort of an big issue going.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, that, you know, if I don't know, if you're put into a dank, dark cell and there's, you know, black mold all over and you get ill, we don't say, well, you've got a sickness, but you're in an unhealthy environment, you know? Um, and so maybe these things that we're seeing are not excusable, but they're the direct symptom of being in an unhealthy environment, such that
Yeah.
the society that's been created is an unhealthy environment for the human organism.
Yeah, and I think it's a trap for people to say everything's okay, everything's fine. You know, you just keep trucking along.
Yeah, the
Because
kids aren't all right, man.
kids are not all right. Yes, the Who recognized that way back when, and it
Right.
was not right early on. It seems like. I
Hmm.
mean, here in the States, I've always appreciated. I don't know whether it happens in Europe, but I've always appreciated here in America that there is a very strong conversation going on about how we're supposed to govern ourselves, and that goes way back. I mean, that's Hamilton who writes about how whether or not we're going to be the subjects of accident and force, or whether we're going to be able to decide our fate by deliberation and choice. You know, so it's something which we've held here for a long time. The problem with that I see is that on the one hand, it means you have to allow some people to be wrong or some people to have crazy ideas, and sometimes those crazy ideas can really go off the rails, like really go off the rails. In fact, they drag the whole society off the rails. And on the other hand, even though I think that we had that healthy debate at the beginning, I think this country at the very beginning had the issue that it was focused primarily on prosperity of money, you know, prosperity of finance, and not necessarily focused on flourishing of the individual soul. And I may be talking, you know, completely off the cuff here on that, but I don't know. I think there's a lot in the original founding of the country, which which wanted to talk about how do you make the most money out of the least effort, and that's kind of ingrained in us nationally. I mean, the very fact that the original proposition that Locke puts forth is that every man has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. You know, and Thomas
Hmm.
Jefferson said that to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness because he thought it was too squalid to talk about property. But he was thinking
Hmm.
about it. They were thinking about it. I think that in our current era, we still think about that. How do we make the most property and the most capital, even when we are trying to deal with religious questions? How do I
Yeah.
maximize religious return? How do I keep religion in a box and yet make holistic healing for myself? You know?
All right. So some philosopher of the last century talked about the reign of quantity, and America is the driving engine,
Yeah.
not alone among the nations, but it's the dynamo
Yeah.
because of that. Because it's an invented state from the ground. It's not only an invented state like many of the modern nation states in Europe, but it's an invented society in the sense that it was founded from the beginning on certain principles. It's one that, where the French Revolution tried to impose a rationalistic system on a pre-existing people, which means you had to, carve away and liquidate the undesirable elements of
Yeah.
society. In the United States, it was, sort of crafted piecemeal, albeit, but, piecemeal, but crafted from the ground up from a rationalist endeavor. Let's start with a constitution of some sort, documents, articles of confederation, something, and build it. I mean, essentially build it like a business. We start with
Yeah.
the articles of incorporation, and it's a partnership between a couple of people. We enfranchise more people, but it all follows this sort of rational endeavor in order to form a more perfect union for greater prosperity, and these kinds of things. And it reads like a business plan, and it follows a business plan. That
Yeah.
maybe at the root there's small, albeit small errors in the root, perhaps something that already sets you off course away from humanity, away from something that's genuinely good for humanity.
Well, let me step in there just to comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. This is not an American bashing session, certainly, and I love
No,
the.
not at all.
But at the root of the thing, I would think that I would propose that it's not that it's deeply flawed at the root, but that at the root there's something that allows the possibility for a deeply flawed thing to occur.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, in that sense, it's that look, if you're going to have a the structure of the government that was created here, I think, is really admirable. And I think it's amazing how they were able to craft this with such cantankerous individuals in the beginning, because they really did have a
Mm-hmm.
great deal of friction between them. So
Yeah.
it's really spectacular that they crafted the country the way they did. But embedded in that was the possibility for certain individuals to seize more and more power. And this is a universal human trait.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the idea to mitigate the power of the individuals by using their own vice against them, using, as they say in the Federalist Papers, to turn the desire for power and factions so that it would be mitigated by other people and also by the own their personal desire for whatever they wanted,
Mm-hmm.
whatever they. That's why the whole checks and balances system, for instance. That's why the whole
Right.
allowing people to make great capital so that they would not be rapacious. But at the same time, it opened the door for something which I think is only recently accelerated, metastasized almost. Because
Metastasized is a good word for
when I
it.
see something happening and starting probably in the 70s, but particularly in the last few years here, is really, it's heinous. And the awfulness of it is that the conversation about how we're to live, the conversation about how we're supposed to govern ourselves and how we're supposed to develop our spiritual lives and our connection to God and the land is polarized. It's not happening anymore. There's
Mm-hmm.
not a about what's wrong with us or what needs to be fixed. Whereas that conversation used
Right.
to occur all the time. 19th century, they had that conversation all the time, and they had these revivals that would occur to gin up the thing again. You had great writers, for instance, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ambrose Bierce, who would write
Mm-hmm.
what they saw as ills. And maybe I'm not seeing it right now because I'm not looking in the right places, but I don't see the writers or artists making that critique because most of them have been commercialized. They've been devoured by the big corporations and made into these money making.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't see a lot of artists writing or composing that might jar us into a conversation again.
Right. And I think that's exactly right. There's not those self-critiques of we as a people, where have we gone wrong, what we need to do to change, because, or, part of one aspect of it that I see is, of course, any claim is necessarily a partisan claim now, and it's
Yeah.
because you have to speak for the whole. And one of the things that occurs to me is, an assessment that some people have made of the way in which, not from the beginning, but from early enough on, sometime in the 19th century, the real move in the United Statesian approach towards homogenization
Yeah.
instead of a more genuine pluralism. And the Canadians like to pull this one out up until recently, but really historically, the Canadian critique of the southern neighbors is that they have a salad bowl approach, where the Americans have a melting pot. Well, a melting pot is where you literally melt all these different elements together into some sort of gray alloy, and that's somehow going to keep everybody good because you shave off all their differences.
Yeah.
This was the big crisis of the 19th century, was the different immigrant groups and the forced, either the forced Americanization on the one hand, or the suspicion of immigrants and these, what this, that, or the other group, in each successive wave are going to be the undoing of our country.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they must conform, rather than a more legitimate plurality. But that didn't just come up in the late 19th century. That traces back to the sort of the what I see is there's two philosophical ideas, or two religious sort of trends, origins, or mythic, but something like this, like two trees growing up and they begin to intertwine. The one is the rationalist project of the Enlightenment.
Yes.
Most of the framers of the Constitution, and the other is that Puritan, that the Roundhead theological, socio-theological view of society, framing of society. And so the idea, from that Puritan framing of society, the principal concern is about the catharsis of society. We retain the pure, we get rid of the impure, we enforce conformity because I'm responsible for my neighbor's sins, in a way that then socially we have to make sure that they don't do that, whatever that is. And that sensibility, though, no longer, I think, had really grown. These two things have grown together like two branches of ivy around a tree, had formally fused into a new organism. And that those two things together, even though the sort of the particular theological commitments of 16th century Calvinism, 17th century Calvinism, are no longer necessarily adhered to by the Republic, which is really more of an empire, which is neither good nor bad in itself. The particular theological principles are no longer adhered to. The theological sensibility, or the religious sensibility of informing conformity, morally responsible for what other people are doing in such a way that we create legislation to prohibit it, is something that's very deeply ingrained, I think, in the American psyche. That is part of that inheritance. That's part of that inheritance. And of course, the solution comes from a rationalist Enlightenment mindset of, well, we construct society to be in this particular way or that particular way.
Yeah, and there's a lot in what you just said, so I'm just trying to parse what to address first. I mean, the last thing you said about the whole religious conviction in America. There's always been a struggle in America between church and state. Obviously, the whole Jefferson's defense between church and state, and it's very important that that division be there, because I think this country has always been worried about falling into a British style of where state and church are one, and then where do you escape to? What that causes oil and water problem, because you have this church and state don't want to mingle, and they end up being cantankerous against each other, antithetical to each other frequently. What you see that most recently in what happened with Nancy Pelosi and the bishop who has excommunicated her. That's you can't have the one just doing whatever you want in government and also claim to be a deeply religious and obedient Catholic, for instance. So there's this constant struggle, and it leads to these periods where we have fallen away, and then we have a tent revival thing, and that's gone on over and over again. And again, it's only recently that the whole religious thing has either been subsumed completely into a sort of Walmart form of religion or a government form of religion, and almost like real religious conviction has been beaten down and oppressed and kind of caged, so that you don't have this counterbalance between the two, and that's disturbing to me.
I think you've hit it right on the head there, that there's sort of evolved an American civil religion that that subsumed the various, it bought up all the different brands that pre-existed it,
Yeah,
and has become a Walmart. I think that's a great analogy. It's become a Walmart that you feel like you've got these different brands that have now been, they've been purchased by a different manufacturer, and the Coca-Cola doesn't quite taste exactly the same as it used to. But I've got freedom because there's these different brands on the shelf. But at the end
yes,
of the day, it's still one big Walmart. And when something doesn't start behaving on the shelf like it should, well, then the cleaning staff come in and they've got to,
yeah.
how do you say, clean up on aisle 3, and they got to come and you've got a crisis, you've got a
But
problem.
that's also kind of a scary analogy too, the cleaning staff, because my sister and I have been going back and forth about Disney, about Walt Disney, and about whether Walt
Sure.
Disney has deep connections to the eugenics movement. And I think she has quite the case to make that
I was
Disney.
bashing him at breakfast this morning. I
Were you?
think this is right on. Yeah,
Oh, good.
it's,
She has, and you'd be interested in what she's uncovered. Disney
I would
early
be.
on apparently was very much in the camp of the eugenicists, and he was very
Sure.
much inspired by the Nazi Party there in Germany. And
That's true.
although he condemned the Nazis, he was a big fan. Disney himself was a big fan of Benito Mussolini.
Yeah.
And I guess where I'm going with that is that Disney is one example. Disney Viacom is one example of these huge octopus companies that has enveloped so much and incorporated so much, and used all these images of mythology and story and religion as sort of tools for getting the message across, getting what they want across, and creating a homogeneity, which honestly it's very strange to me. Because on the one hand, I can understand that if you have a product that works, right, and you want everybody to conform to the product to make the society run smoothly, that's great. But what is the product? Is the product going to be, I don't know, waspish America, Because if so, what do you do with all the Polacks and all the Africans and all of the Middle Easterners and all of the Orientals? And what do you do with them? Because they don't fit into the waspish model. My connection to the Masonic systems, the Masonic orders, it
Hmm.
seems that that's really what they wanted, was that waspish image, and
Absolutely.
formed got, as you said, cleaned up on aisle 6, which is, it scares me, because when I think cleaned up in terms of eugenics, that's some awful stuff. I was
Yeah.
looking into this thing that Germany did, where they had kidnapping and forced sterilization of all these children
Sure.
of mixed race,
Yep.
and that's appalling. It's truly appalling, but it's not something which everybody here in America saw as a bad idea. Many
No, a
people
lot of people saw it as a good idea. I think a lot of people today still see it as a good
think
idea.
they do. I think they do. And so homogeneity of religion or experience of life or
Hmm.
of ethnic diversity, homogeneity looks good on the surface, but it has some serious implications. And maybe, I don't know,
Especially if
that's
you're any of the, oh, go ahead.
yes. If you happen to be Scottish, it's not a good idea. Just sweep you up, laddie.
I,
I think what we're seeing in the last few years, like probably since the 2000 teens, has been this increase of one side of the homogeneity project,
mhm.
where they tried very hard, pushed very hard to move towards their own idea, their own message. And what it's done, it's not killed the conversation, but it's made the conversation very, very polarized in America. Um,
Yeah.
and the other thing it's done too, and this is something that somebody was pointing out, it's made it so that young people especially have grown up in a system that you
Hmm.
glitched out. Young
I'm
people,
still here.
young people have grown up in a system where they are kind of lost in the conversation, and
Hmm.
they end up having to raise themselves and entertain themselves and to fill their minds with whatever images they can get off of the dark web. And that's not a
Hmm.
good recipe for creating healthy souls. Uh, my friend and I,
Incidentally,
yeah, go
I was
ahead.
just, as a tie-in to that exact point, Tolkien, what a lot of people may not know, I'm sure you're aware of, and I'm only very nominally aware of, is Tolkien's jettisoned attempt, which he ultimately scrapped in the end, to write a follow-up to The Lord of the Rings,
Mm,
where the people, like the kids of Gondor, start getting into some really dark stuff. And he started writing the sort of the notes for a novel where the kids aren't all right and they start playing goblin games and getting into necromancy and all that kind of stuff. And he realized that I'm just not going to go there. But I think that's the kind of image. That's one can spell out pretty quickly what the consequences would be.
yes, and I
And I
think
think that's what you're talking about.
an interesting point that you bring up Tolkien. And by the way, I do this whole conversation. I have our chapter in the back of my mind, so
Hmm.
I'm not neglecting Tolkien. I just don't want to also move the conversation as a sort of a artificial shift into talking about the chapter. But no,
No, no.
Tolkien's notes for the sequel to The Lord of the Rings were primarily based on the idea that he saw history running in cycles, that things
Hmm.
happen and they happen and they're repeated. So, for instance, his flight to the Noldor was a terrible
Yeah.
event that occurred way back in the past, or the stories of Fingolfin and Finwë and all those stories that occur in the Silmarillion, which he saw as this greater work, were in themselves prototypes for events that occurred later on, and they're referred to
Yeah.
frequently by characters like Aragorn. This is
Hmm.
my path. I don't think Tolkien bought into the modern idea that we're all progressing towards a brighter, happier future. I don't think he thought that at all. He saw things as a sort of long beat, he called them, where it was just, you're fighting for this moment in time to make things as best you can, but you have no control over the future and you have no real control over the past necessarily. All you have is what you have, the time you're given, and what you
Right.
decide to do, which I think is a much
Right.
way of looking at things and thinking about, how we're all much better than we were in the past and we have to keep moving forward and progressing towards the glorious day of next Tuesday. That's a
Hmm.
millennialism chafes.
It is. And again, that's where that religious sensibility comes in.
But I want to go
That
back to
shapes
something.
much of.
I want to go back to something we brought up here, Cameron, because I think it's important
Hmm.
to this idea of homogeneity. I think that the homogeneity, the attempt to make things more homogeneous, is not just limited to America. I think it exists elsewhere. Normally, elsewhere it exists in
Absolutely.
purges and exterminations of whole villages, and peoples.
Right.
Here, it exists in the everybody will buy the product. The
Hmm.
product it will conform to, and when you don't conform to the product, you need to go elsewhere. And that
Right.
is because it shuts down the conversation when you shove out anybody who might suggest something different or offer something different. Then you create the product, but you also get rid of all these opportunities. I'm thinking particularly of other cultures,
Hmm.
as Denzel Washington has said frequently. It's not about race; it's about culture, right? How
Yeah.
how does our culture differ? And I think he's spot on because there's so many cultures that have been brought into America that have been so good, so beneficial, so excellent. And why didn't we get them in here before? When
Right.
my daddy was a young boy, there was no such thing as a pizza parlor. They did not exist in America, and because the Italian immigration wave had not really occurred until after World War One. And so when the first pizza parlor opened in his town, he said it was the most marvelous thing. He had never had anything like a pizza pie before. He said it was just the greatest thing in the world. And I think to myself, what is there anything analogous to that? Is there anything like in my culture, which cropped up suddenly? I'm like, wow, that's spectacular. I never thought of that before. I'm sure there is,
We need
but
haggis joints in every corner, Will.
I guess, oh my gosh, no. that boat's already sailed. But what I one example comes very much to mind is that there's a current immigration from the Middle East and a current immigration from Africa, a new wave of over, and their perspective, not that their food is good too, but their perspective is what's so interesting. To see so many Nigerian or Ugandan families, for instance, here in America, who love the freedom and love the country and want to learn and want to succeed. I'm like, that is such a fresh perspective. And we need to incorporate more of that. And their defiance of the product and their defiance of the message and their refusal to buy into everything that's sold to them. That to me is quite motivating. But what I see as happening on a large scale is far more like the dragon waste, in that when a company, when a government, when a society tries to make a homogeneity, you'll all conform, you'll all believe the same way. You'll all, can I use the example, you'll all get the jab. When they start doing, what they create is a silence in anybody who would object. They obliterate them and they make a wasteland around their fortress or their tower. It's a very drastic thing that occurs.
It is.
So here's my maybe clumsy segue back into our chapter.
Actually, that's, if I can give the assist on that, any dissenting voices or others who aren't into the product are like the birds who fly away, and all that's left then is the desolation and the waste.
Yeah, it is like that, isn't it? There's a great passage. I just read this when I was reviewing this chapter. Where is it? I love it because they're describing the dragon waste as they come into that land. And this is, again, chapter 11 in the Hobbit. That's what this podcast or whatever is about. Okay. So it says here, they reached the skirts of the mountain, and it says, they did not dare to follow the river much further towards the gate, but they went on beyond the end of the southern spur until, lying hidden behind a rock, they could look out and see the dark cavernous opening in a great cliff wall between the arms of the mountain. The dragon is somewhere there. They don't know where it is, so they're hiding behind a rock. Out of it the waters of the running river sprang, and out of it too there came a stream and a dark smoke. Nothing moved in the waste save the vapor and the water, and every now and again a black and ominous crow. The only sound was the sound of the stony water, and every now and again the harsh croak of a bird. And Balin shuddered. And that description is interesting to me because very much like, on the one hand, what happens there in Lord of the Rings when they're outside of the Black Gate, the description of those slag lands outside the Black Gate. It's also interesting. It's very much like what one would have seen there on the Somme in World War I, that wasted land and all those destroyed cities that have been devastated by bombing. You get a sense of this. The land is just denuded of any kind of cover or green or life that could have provided you the ability to avoid the stare of the eye. Dragon, not on. But it reminds me of what the experience of what we seem to be going through right now as a society. The sense that all the different functions, all the different structures that used to exist to provide cover, there's an attempt to tear them down. And without
I think that's,
where do you hide?
Exactly right. There's no place to hide from the dragon, because the leveling of society, which has been at work for 300 years, has only taken on rapid, more industrialized, more expedited, has picked up speed.
Yes.
Right. To now the leveling of the last institutions down. Yeah. And maybe eventually, as we see, where they pointed out, actually in this moment here, this is maybe worth just highlighting on that. In between kind of the sections that you just mentioned, they came round a bend and the river, and they saw flowing splash many boulders into a wide valley shadowed by the mountain's arms, the gray ruins of ancient houses, towers, and walls. There lies all that is left of Dale, said Balaam. The mountain sides were green with woods, and all the sheltered valley rich and pleasant in the days when the bells rang in that town. He looked both sad and grim as he said this. He had been one of Thorin's companions on the day when the dragon came. And I think that that in a scenario of this desolation of Smaug, the desolate wasteland, you might have at best the ruins of an old civilization,
Yes.
but they're hollow and they're cold and they're still gray because they're stone.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't get out of my mind that image of the bombed out cities in World War One. It's like that. But it's that image for me is an image of so much that I'm seeing in terms of the social structures that we experience now. I mean, let's take an example. When I was a kid and I was not yet married and I wanted to go out with somebody, you'd go out and you would meet people and you would call them on the phone and you'd get together and you'd play in a band, or you'd go to the beach and party down, or you'd go out and roam around downtown, and you had all these different things you do. Bowling was a big deal for us, and
Right.
young people, how do young people date? How do they even meet each other these days? Do they even have the desire to meet or get out of their mom's basement and stop playing Fortnite?
Many don't. Many don't.
And when they do, how do they find anybody? When half of the population seems like it's bonkers,
That's a common complaint, right? They don't. There's no one. There's no one to find.
and it's like the problem is that it's like having nothing there to give you hope or joy, and the dragon is staring at you the whole time, because the enemy is not really the opposite political party. The enemy is not those human beings who have opposing views. The enemy is something existential. It's a being.
It's not
consciousness.
It's not the evil. It's not the evil dictator who's got a name. It's not the Stalin who's sitting over in office in the wherever in the capital. It's not the government. It's not Big Brother, a government official who's watching you, but it's the machine. It's the machine itself, the technium or whatever you want to call it. That's this dragon. That there's something, spiritual, if you will. And it is watching, or at least it could be watching at any moment, and you don't have someplace to hide behind.
Yep. And that was, I remember
that's it.
Franz Kafka writing about that, how the problem wasn't these individuals that did you wrong. It was that the individuals themselves were servants of a much bigger thing, which was that the machine that was already put in motion. Václav Havel writes too, how the machine sweeps up ordinary schlubs so that they become a hammer, or they become a shotgun. And they just do their job. And even there, one could say in a Christian level, what is running the machine? It's a as Romano Guardini puts it, it's a spirit of the demonic. There's a spirit of the demonic, whatever that means, seems to run this machine that wants to hammer everybody down.
Right.
And involved, they end up being just these poor schmoes. They themselves wanted to make a living, and so Jesus. I watched a video about China and about the lockdown, and it's completely off the radar in terms of regular news. So if anybody gets a chance to see what's going on in China right now, it is an absolutely terrifying thing. The whole country, especially Taiwan, is on permanent lockdown. You can't even leave your house, and people are starving to death and dying in their own apartments and killing themselves because they're so depressed. And I watched one scene, one video where they uploaded it to the internet, used a cell phone, blah, 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 where these people were locking their door against the state officials who were trying to get in to vaccinate them. And they locked the door, and the state officials were kicking down their door, breaking it apart and coming in to force them to the ground to give them vaccines. And it was hellish. I was like, these poor people who can't even find escape in their apartments. And yet the officials themselves were like, they were angry, obviously, but they were just like functionaries. they weren't evil like the horns and stuff. It was like they were just ordinary dopes who were doing
Just a
this
tool, man.
tools.
Yeah,
It was, I mean, that was probably more horrifying than anything. Was that you're not dealing with Satan incarnate. You're just dealing with some functionary.
exactly. Because if it's the enemy at the door, there's a real somebody you can oppose.
Yeah.
But here, in that kind of scenario where they're just a functionary, because the enemy has armies of assistants, as Bono said. It's a very interesting song. Get Out of Your Own Way, by the way. The
Mm.
lyrics of that are pretty good. But it's like what Tolkien wrote in The Lord of the Rings. There was the mouth of Sauron. He was it. No, his name is told in no tale, for he himself had forgotten it. Right, his only identity was to be the mouth of Sauron. Well, you can't push back. Like there's not an entity there. It's like agents in the Matrix or something. It's just a computer. It's the manifestation, the avatar, a bigger computer program that's out there.
Right.
There's nothing to fight, nothing to resist at hand, which is almost more dangerous than if you had a real human being who is fully human
Yes.
in front of you, who you could reason with. But if they're
Yes.
just like, hey man, I'm following protocol, there's nothing you can do.
Yes. It just
Resistance really is futile.
is. God, yes, another great example. Interesting. The first thing you brought up was a Bono lyric, because that was exactly what I was thinking too. It shows my past. Back in the day, kids, U2 was a band which really represented a zeitgeist that was going on. And there's a lyric where they say, I'd hit out if I only knew where to hit. I'd hit out if I only knew where to hit. Which it represents this sort of confusion of what the hell am I supposed to do against this machine? And the zeitgeist, which again, maybe I'm looking in the wrong place, but I don't see this in music and popular music at all these days. The zeitgeist in the 80s and the 90s, and even the early 2000s, was one of just anger and rebellion. I remember the Sex Pistols being this way, and I remember the Clash being this way, and U2 was this way, and Garbage later on with the grunge movement was this way,
Right.
and REM and Radiohead, all these bands that were writing music was like, I am a piece of undigestible material. You are not going to consume me. And for me, growing, wow, yeah, I am the rebellious spirit. I mean, I'm not going to be subsumed by the machine, by the dragon. And I don't know, maybe I don't see it right now. Follow current music, but so many, even U2 to some degree, so many bands and so much music right now coming out is just a sort of pablatum. It's like the part of the home product that's put out.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you get birds that sing a croaking tune, which again, I'm not trying to make this artificial connection.
But it's exactly appropriate, because Tolkien belabors the point of the distinction between crows and ravens, as we'll see in a later chapter. But these are crows; these are carrion crows, which are distinct from ravens, a more sophisticated bird that, to the naked eye, looks similar, unless you're a particular specialist at birding. But yeah, these are crows. That's the bird that's left. The only bird that can tolerate being in this desolation, in this desolate waste, is a carrion crow, who just croaks.
Here's the thing that is so fascinating about Tolkien, is he was able to get this perfect symbolism, this perfect imagery over and over and over again. The image of birds for him, and he loved nature, trees, he loved the forest, he loved birds. The image of birds for him is the image of the plethora, the various forms of artwork that all kind of work together to create beauty. Because when you listen to bird song, just stand and listen for a couple minutes, you notice there are hundreds of birds singing different songs, and yet they don't not clashing with each other. They end up making a sort of symphony of the outdoors. I'm listening to it right now, actually, out there.
Pluralism right there that we were talking about.
Which is a symbolic image, and has been a symbolic image way back. I remember Giotto painting, have birds everywhere. It's a symbolic image for the plurality of the human race, of what we do when we're doing art, when we're creating artistry. that the music of Monteverdi should sit on a par with the music of Palestrina, which, I hate to say this, and some people will object, should sit on a par with the music of, say, Led Zeppelin. Can we go out on a limb to say,
Yeah.
or the music of
Yes.
Scott, or the music of Duke Ellington, or not that they're all equally great in terms of their artistry skill, but that all of them are creating their music, and they're not contradictory in the attempt to capture beauty. They're all working together in a great symphony. That to
And
me is Mark.
Yes, it is. And it's the conspicuous absence. Tolkien mentions birds just enough in this chapter to highlight their conspicuous absence of birdsong.
Yes.
And it's a bird that brings us that provides the solution, but it's not, as we might want it to be, some lark sitting on a green, somehow, here's if it were a modern, right, if it were made into a modern movie, but whatever, I don't know what Jackson did with this, but what we want to see is that they're at the door, they're on the doorstep, and it's in this hidden way, and then maybe there's this little tiny, there's a little tiny olive tree that's started to grow or something, and is a little sprig of greenery, and a lark comes and sits and sings. We hear this, and Bilbo heard for the first time since who knows how long, there was the bird's song, and it awakened their hearts, and then the sun shone through, and then the gate opened, and they had the key, and they put it. But that's not what happens. That's not what happens, right? The general. I just want to say something of the general arc of how this chapter goes, and we can talk about the details if that's all right with you, because I think this is just around this theme of a bird singing as somehow. It is symbolic, and it's conspicuously absent even in the climax of the chapter, even in the solution of the chapter. But what do we see instead? We're told early on in the chapter. So there's the crows, right? But a little shortly after that, they kind of settle into a camp, and in the meanwhile, some of them explored the ledge beyond the opening. They found a path that led higher up and higher into the mountain. They didn't dare to venture very far that way, nor was there much use in it. Right? It's just more of the craggy, gray wasteland. But up there a silence reigned, broken by no bird or sound, except that of the wind in the crannies of stone. They spoke, the company, the dwarves and Bilbo, spoke low, and never called nor sang, for danger brooded in every door. For danger brooded in every rock. And so there was no singing over this. They were too eager to trouble about the moon ruins, or thinking, like they couldn't think. There's this heaviness, there's this darkness, nobody speaks up. It's desolate. And they're just depressed. Their spirits are low at this point. They rise a little bit when they find the path, but they sink again when they realize it goes to where the door probably should be. We can't find a door. Bilbo's sitting there. The dwarves are sitting nearby, and he overhears them grumbling, say, well, maybe we should send him in the front gate. Who cares if he gets eaten by a dragon at this point? We got nothing else. This is stupid. Why are we even here? They get that way, and everybody gets that way. Like, we get that way because we're living in a wasteland, and we know this is where the door is supposed to be. It's right there on the map, but what the hell am I supposed to do now? So Bilbo's sitting there. He's sitting there, goodness gracious, is that what they're beginning to think of me? Right? He shudders at the thought of going into the steaming gate. The night was miserable. They barely slept. He gets up. He's sitting there, and there's many days kind of go. But what do we have is Bilbo's sitting there on what they've called the doorstep, this little alcove in the side of the mountain, high up on a cliff, where they know the door should be. He went to the opening, and there, pale and faint, was a thin new moon rising above the rim of the earth. At that very moment, he heard a sharp, not a bird song, not a lark singing all of a sudden, but he heard a sharp crack behind him. There on the grey stone in the grass was an enormous thrush, nearly coal-black, with its pale yellow breast freckled with dark spots. Crack! It had caught a snail and was knocking it on the stone. Crack! Crack! Suddenly, Bilbo understood. Forgetting all danger, he stood on the ledge and hailed the dwarves, shouting and waving. Suddenly he understood. When the thrush knocks on Durin's Day, right? The last sunlight of Durin's Day, whatever that is. You know, the things that was written on the map, that was written ages ago, but it's the thrush cracking snails against the dead rock that is the harbinger, the call that the bridegroom cometh, as it were.
Mm. There's so much in that. Okay, I don't know where to start necessarily, but I'm just going to start randomly. Why is the thrush coal black? I mean, when you look at the animated version by Rankin Bass, he's brown and red. It's like a robin or something.
It's American thrush.
Yeah, I don't know what Jackson does with it. I have the
Probably
fact that it's
pigeon
black
or a parrot or something.
a parrot, yeah. The fact that it's on the one hand coal black,
Yes,
which means it's like a crow, but it's not a crow.
it's
not
exactly.
Blends in with that desolation, everything else being gray and charred in the area. So it's almost like a creature out of the underworld.
Exactly.
It's a thrush, and a thrush is a bird that makes a specific song, and it's actually a beautiful bird when it comes down to it, and it's a magical creature, right?
Yeah.
Why is it cracking snails? This is something that's always struck me. Why does he have snails be the thing that is cracking? Why not crack something else, beside the snail? Is it that the snail has that Fibonacci golden spiral on its back? Is that something that Tolkien was? I don't know.
Wow.
It's just, but the way that it's described even in the prophecy is standing at the gate when the thrush knocks. When the thrush knocks. In other words, it's the thrush that knocks on the door to the dragon's lair. It's the thrush that knocks on the door to the subconscious. It's the thrush that ends up being sort of the herald, like Hermes almost.
Yeah, because all of their knocking and pounding and hammering and pushing and magical spells they're trying to use to open the door, push where a door should be, none of that worked. None of their efforts. But it's a thrush that has to knock.
This is very much like, this is repeated in The Lord of the Rings, by the way, for those who aren't thinking about this necessarily, in Moria, outside Moria, near the lake, they're stuck again and they can't get in, and then finally Gandalf at his wit's end, he overhears this conversation that the hobbits are having, and he realizes that the spell is to say Methlon, because it says speak friend and enter. So you have to say the word friend, and that will open the doors to the dark underworld of Moria. I am a friend of the underworld. I wonder if there's something going on here, that the thrush is the friend to these travelers. He is a creature that is almost like a creature from the underworld, being black, and he's doing something destructive. He's doing something where he is breaking up the image of this little slimy creature. The snail leaves these lines of wherever it goes. But they're also, to some degree, creatures of beauty. If you ever actually look at these things, and they have this rainbow, the Fibonacci sequence is there, and breaking them apart, destroying them. Is it in a way that the entrance to the subconscious, the realm of the dragon, actually has to have that breaking apart to jar us and to realize, oh, that's how we get in. That's what opens this.
Right. And the breaking of what specifically? It's their shell, it's their protection, it's so fragile. It's a fragile shell, but it's a fragile mask or shell or box that it encases itself in, is being smashed on the rock by the bird so that it can consume it, because the bird eats these. You can see this, the thrush that live near here, they look just like this, and they'll be out on the rocks in the morning, and they could pick up a snail smashed against the rock so that they can eat it. This is a common. It's a commonplace. It's a trifle.
But it's also something which happens. Notice 3 times. Crack, crack, crack.
Yes.
3. So it's a spell.
Exactly.
And it's a spell that is a shocking spell. It's like, oh, because it says Bilbo suddenly understood. It's like, oh my gosh,
breaks
it's like that.
The silence.
It breaks the silence because it is
like a koan. All of a sudden, Bilbo understands.
It's a koan. I like that. Yeah, suddenly he understood. It reminds me of that Robert Frost, the way that a crow had knocked down snow on his back, and suddenly causes him to appreciate something of the day that he had rued. that sudden shock of snow falling down Robert Frost's back, the knocked off a tree by a crow, in that case, another
Yeah.
black, is a similar experience. You get that sudden shock waking up, and that shocks you into realizing this is the way, not the doorbell, ding dong, hello smog, but rather that this is what we are supposed to do at this moment, this specific time. We're supposed to do this specific thing. I think that this is brilliant. Again, I've said this so often with Tolkien. I think this is a brilliant passage because
Yeah.
it is otherwise kind of incomprehensible. How the hell would they have a prophecy like this? And how the hell would some bird fit into it? And how the hell would they be there right on Durance Day? It's almost like this is providential or something, you know.
There's
But
another hand at work other than, how do you say, there's another guiding spirit at work other than just the spirit of this, what was Guardians, the spirit of the diabolical, the spirit of I mean, the satanic spirit, the spirit of darkness or something. There's
yep.
another hand at work. There's another order that that can supersede it.
And sometimes that order employs creatures and images that seem to be destructive or dark and outside of our ken to shake us up, wake us.
Right.
The dark bird out of the underworld is not the bird we'd expect. We'd expect a pleasant dove, or we would expect a brightly colored songbird or something like that. It's not that. It's this ordinary, dull thrush, the creature of the underworld, and it's doing something destructive that suddenly wakes us up. That's what the thing we're supposed to do. And this is why I think this is an example of what in Christianity is called the Felix Culpa moment. God sometimes uses, or frequently uses, those shocking elements, that experience sharp suffering, to wake us up to what's really important. That if we are living a life where everything's happy and pleasant, we never have that moment of actually seeing clearly and putting things in perspective. You know, when I was a kid, I don't know if I've ever told this story. When I was a kid, I was a sophomore in high school, and I was just ding-donging around, you know, chasing skirts and having a good time. And I thought, you know, what am I supposed to do with my life? I didn't really think about that much, but it was like I didn't really have any direction or purpose. And in the springtime of that year, my mom was shot. She was shot on the highway, and I don't know if I've told this story or not. She was driving to the mall. She was driving to the mall with my sister in the passenger seat, and somebody opened up on the highway with a shotgun and blasted out the back window of her car. And one of the pellets of the shotgun hit her in the head and lodged underneath her brain in her nasal cavity, and she had to have a surgery to have it removed. And it was, wow, that was a short, sharp shock if I ever had one, because that really woke suddenly, very suddenly. The fact that I had to take charge of my own life, because there's nothing like cleaning your mom's own blood out of the front seat to tell you that you are mortal and, you know, you are dust, and to dust you will return.
Right.
And at the same time in that story, the other amazing element was that the driver's rear window had a blast in it where the glass had been blasted through. No, it was blasted out. That's right. The driver's back window was blasted out. And on the passenger side, there was a hole in the window about that big, which I still to this day do not understand this. If he was shooting from the driver's side, the spray would go outward, meaning it would hit the back window first and then spray into the car, killing whoever was there. And it didn't do that. It collapsed. It was like the hand of God collapsed it and sent it out the other window, so that my sister is living to this day, thanks be to God. Wow. But that experience, I remember that experience of having my mom come back from surgery and how weak she was and how we had to really take care of her for several days afterwards. And then the experience of cleaning the blood out of the front seat. That was when that crack occurred, and all of a sudden I could not just be this Casanova running after girls, you know, and that was my purpose in life. I had to find something else that was really woke me up to a path of not just spiritual and intellectual, but I think of just becoming a whole person. Yeah. I think that the Lord sends us images, experiences, ideas that hit us and hit us hard. And when they do, be aware of the fact that this is the moment. This is Durin's day. This is when we have to use the key to unlock that passage.
Yeah. Right. And there's no time for dilly-dally then too. It's not how do you say? The thrush knocking doesn't effect the door opening. It heralds it.
It heralds it.
Or it heralds the opportunity. A small piece of rock shales away, and there's a keyhole. You still have to have the key and be ready. You have to be watchful and waiting, vigilant and attentive to then put the key in at the moment and turn it before the sun sets.
Yes, right, exactly. Before the sun goes down and you're cast into darkness again, which is another great image, right? That passage, we read this one, but I love that passage where it says, he explained what to the dwarves. It says, the hobbits standing by the gray stone and the dwarves with wagging beards watching impatiently, they all fell silent. The sun sank lower and lower, and their hopes fell. It sank into a reddened cloud and disappeared. The dwarves groaned, but still Bilbo stood almost without moving. The little moon was dipping to the horizon, and evening was coming on. Then suddenly, when their hope was lowest, a red ray of the sun escaped like a finger through a rent in the cloud. A gleam of light came straight through the opening into the bay and fell on the smooth rock face. The old thrush, who had been watching from a high perch with beady eyes and head cocked on one side, gave a sudden trill, and there was a loud crack. A flake of rock split from the wall and fell. A hole appeared suddenly about 3 feet from the ground. Quickly, trembling lest the chance should fade, the dwarves rushed to the rock and pushed in vain. The key, cried Bilbo. Where is Thorin? The key, shouted Bilbo. Try it now while there's still time. So great. That whole image is so great. And again, it's like, how, this is so coincidental. How the hell did this happen? But put that as question aside. The images he uses, the last ray of light. Again, it's like that image in Lord of the Rings. I have to go back to that. He eats this later on with Frodo and Sam at the crossroads, and the darkness of Mordor. One last ray of light comes through suddenly and shines on the ring of flowers around the head of the fallen king.
Right.
And
that's right.
Frodo says, they will not prevail. They will not last forever. The darkness will not. It's an amazing scene, similar to this, where they open the door. But notice that the image he uses too. They say that it's like a finger that comes down, like that image in the great painting of God in the city of Adam.
Right. It's the finger of God coming.
The finger of God comes down. And it's that moment that we suddenly get the flake falling off, and you use the key and you enter into what ends up being this very dangerous situation. But you go down into the underworld, into the realm of the subconscious, into the lair of the dragon to confront him, because you can get in. I was thinking this morning, and this maybe is interesting to me. Back to our conversation of homogeneity. I think one of the reasons I've always Tolkien is many people I've spoken to love Tolkien and love other things like Tolkien because they think of him as their own. This is my story. This is my own story. And when it becomes commercial, when it becomes homogenized, it's almost like a violation of the being the person. Musical bands, obscure artwork, small eateries that you go to for a burger here and there, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's like our place. That's our own thing. And it's very different from the commercial pablatum that's pushed on people. We don't want that. We want our own thing. Back in the day when Tolkien was still new and had not yet reached the into, we had this era where small things would come out connected to Tolkien, like a board game, for instance, or or you get a calendar based on Tolkien. You're like, this is so great! Look at this. This is one of our things. And now it's like there's so much. It's a glut that you can't go anywhere, but you see some Tolkien thing. It's almost like it hurts. It's a deluge of commercialism that has not ruined it, but has definitely.
Oh. But it's like Charlie Brown and the Charlie Brown's Christmas. You just go around everywhere you go. It's even my own dog has gone commercial.
Yeah, yeah, and a good example because Santa Claus is on every street corner. He's no longer coming
Hmm.
into the house, your own house. But I love the way the original Tolkien writings, all the other
Yes.
gizmos and gewgaws aside, the Tolkien writings are still, they're hated by academia, and they're not seen as proper academic works, and they're seen as a lesser thing by many academics, and yet most people that read Tolkien love him, love his stuff much
Yeah.
more than Proust, or
Well, why? Yeah, why is some of this crap stuff put forward? Like it's all the contemporaneous with Tolkien. It's not like, well, he's new, you got to read old literature. There's really crap stuff and
and,
decent stuff, but it's just a different band.
yeah, I don't
This
know,
is not treated the same way.
but whatever the case, I know one thing. My own experience and the experience of others that I've talked to is that because those other writers got subsumed by academia and made into academic works, it's like they were
Hmm.
digested by the academic beast. And Tolkien has
That's
never been
true.
the academic beast. When you read Herman Melville,
Even as an academic, he refused to be digested by the academic beast.
yes, yeah,
The
yeah,
man himself.
yeah. When you read like Herman Melville, Melville's great. I mean, his stuff is amazing, but he's an
Hmm.
academic beast. You read Herman Melville because he's an academic work. Or you read Chaucer, or you read Milton, or
Hmm.
and because they're part of the academic thing. Um, and there's a tint there. There's a taint. Maybe because they become part of the beast, and you can no longer read, say, Robert Louis Stevenson or the poetry of T.S. Eliot. You can't read it with the same kind of zest when they were just writers. They were just
You
writing their
can't
own stuff.
read it, you have to study it.
You have to study it. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
If and if you're out in the common world, the working world, you don't read it because that's all part of academia anyway. Who would
That's
want
what
to read
those people do.
what those people
Yeah.
do?
Right.
And that's another reason why I love Tolkien is he has not been digested by the beast yet. He's somebody who stands very much apart from it, and
Yeah.
he tells a story that most people in our modern era go through.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the least of which
Exactly.
the story of this journey that we've been cataloging here for the last 11 chapters.
Right.
But
And we're left to enter the 12th. I want you let you say something just as you that reminded me of something, but
yep,
go ahead.
no, just that the journey has wound around, but has ended up right here at this point,
Yes.
which again for me is a classic example of how providence works. Our whole
And just
life,
on time.
right on time.
Like,
Now, whatever the thing is that's happening right now that you're having to deal with, that's the thing you do, whatever it is.
or I should correct myself. Whether they arrived just on time or not, I can't say. But just looking at the calendar itself, they seem to have arrived a few days early. So when it seems they're sitting for an interminable wait, it may be that you're just a little ahead of time. When you're sitting there bored in the waste and nothing is coming through, it may be you just have to wait a little longer.
They also serve who only stand and wait, as that one
Right.
academic poet.
As that one
You know,
academic poet said. Or
what do you,
like the protagonist in Kung Fu is a young boy, right? He's got to stand attentive outside the gates. And it's
yeah,
only because it's standing attentive, which is actually taken. I'm sure it's common also in the Shaolin Temple or whatever. That kind of thing is actually prescribed or described by John Cashin, a sort of early, third century, fourth century monastic anthropologist writing about these weirdos who went off to the desert to live this sort of new, they invented Christian monasticism living in the deserts of Egypt. He said, yeah, to get in, you got to stand attentive outside the gate, and, be ignored and despised, and only those who stand attentive can enter.
yeah, it's a great point because the modern fervor for action now, immediate
Hmm.
act, immediate response, send off a tweet, whatever it is to me disgusting. It's maybe this is an immediate knee-jerk reaction I'm having right now, but it's almost like you can't just wait, think about it, and then give a civilized response. You know, you can't be satisfied with the fact that this pain you're going through right now might be passing.
It might
That
be passing.
the moment
And it
you're
might,
looking to be tomorrow or the day after, if it's not today.
right. And it might be heralded by something as simple and mundane as a thrush cracking snails against the rock. And only if you're ready can you insert the key. But it's not
Yeah.
open immediately to gold and jewels, right? When the door opens, they push it 5 feet high and 3 broad. This door was outlined and slowly, without a sound, swung inwards. It
Yes.
seemed as if the dark. And so, what's your reward for waiting patiently and getting here just at the right time? Gosh, this is exciting. You push the door up and it swings inwards. And it seemed as if darkness flowed out like a vapor from the hole in the mountainside. A deep darkness in which nothing could be seen lay before their eyes, a yawning mouth leading in and down.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's so great. That's so
Right,
great.
we've
Yeah.
got there, you
This is
know?
what I'm looking forward to, kids. You know, now you get to look down old or not, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Wow. But I mean, that's what's necessary, isn't it? I mean, if
It
you're going
is.
to complete the journey, what did you go out in the wilderness to find anyway? You know, was it just some dude
Right.
dressed in soft clothing? Because that, you made a long journey for nothing, Johnny.
Right.
Uh, no, you have to.
Whereas,
The moment will occur, and you have to go down into that in order to finish
mhm.
this, to finish it, right?
Yeah, as Leonard Cohen says, I've struggled with some demons. They were middle class and tame, etc., etc. And the refrain is, you want it darker, but I'm ready, my lord.
I like that. I like that.
Great. It's from his last album. Great, great song. His refrain throughout actually is Hineni. Hineni. It's the Hebrew word for here I am. Behold, here I am.
Yes, because when we ask the Lord to send us, it's frequently that He's sending us into something that's not going to be pleasant at first.
Hmm. But it's the only
But
way to the treasure.
the only way to the treasure. It's the only way to the resurrection, isn't it?
Hmm.
Yeah. Unless you go through that experience, unless you drink from that cup, unless you eat my body, you have no resurrection in me.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's a somber note, I think, but it's a good note to end on.
That's right.
We are going to finish this quest of the Hobbit, I assure you.
That's right.
It'll be a pleasant ending, even though Bilbo doesn't right now think it's going to be pleasant. For us, it will be a pleasant ending.
It will be.
So, Cameron, I thank you. And
Thank you,
take
Will.
take care of that cold. It's like you're at least dry, if not else.
Yeah. Yeah. On the mend.
On that note, farewell, wherever you fare. To Ares, receive you at the journey's end.
And may the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.
God bless, my friend.
Au revoir.
Where is the hand on the stream and the red fire glowing? Where is the spring and the harvest and the tall corn growing? They have passed like rain on the mountain, like a wind in the meadow. The days have gone down in the west, behind the hills in the shadow. Who shall gather the smoke of the dead wood burning, or behold the flow